The morning air was crisp and still, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Mist curled gently through the trees, softening the sunlight that filtered down in delicate beams. Birds called to one another, their songs echoing lightly across the forest floor. Margaret, a woman in her early 70s, moved along a narrow path she had walked countless times before. Her silver hair was tucked under a faded scarf, and her hands, worn and steady, carried a small wicker basket. She bent occasionally to collect herbs and wildflowers, her movements slow but deliberate. Living alone at the edge of this forest had taught her patience and attentiveness. She knew every tree, every rock, every hidden root along her path. The day began like any other, quiet, measured, familiar. Margaret hummed softly to herself as she worked, enjoying the simplicity of the morning. The forest felt safe, predictable, but then, just beyond a stand of pines, she noticed something that made her pause. The usual rhythm of the forest seemed off. Leaves rustled too heavily. A branch snapped under an uneven weight. Somewhere further ahead, the ground shivered under a deep, irregular thud, not the gait of deer, nor the skitter of foxes. Margaret's heart gave a small jolt. She could not see what was making the sound, but instinct told her it was no ordinary animal. Her breath slowed as she tried to listen, every sense alert. The forest remained quiet in spots, yet in others, the faint echoes of heavy steps unsettled her. A sense of unease settled over her. She felt the pull of curiosity and caution at the same time. Whatever it was large, and it was nearby. Margaret moved cautiously forward, her eyes scanning the forest floor. The broken branches she had noticed earlier were more numerous now, scattered in a wide arc, as if something large had passed through in a hurry. She knelt to examine one of the deeper impressions in the soft earth. The footprint was enormous, far, larger than any deer or bear she had ever seen, its edges pressed into the soil with a weight that made her stomach tighten. A low groan, guttural and strained, drifted from somewhere ahead. Margaret froze, her hands gripping the basket tightly. The sound was unlike any animal she had known, heavy, slow, and pained. She could almost feel the weight behind it, the struggle of something immense trying to move. A faint streak of dark red caught her eye along the rocks and leaves. Her heart skipped. Blood, fresh, vivid, and unmistakable. Margaret's mind raced, but not with fear alone. Compassion surged immediately. Whatever this creature was, it was injured, vulnerable. She had lived long enough to understand that pain demanded attention, even if it came from the most unlikely source. She took a deep breath and tried to calm herself. Every instinct told her to retreat, to leave the forest to its natural course. And yet, she could not. Something about the groan had struck a chord, deep within her. There was intelligence in the sound, a plea that she understood without words. Margaret took careful steps, moving closer while keeping her presence gentle and non-threatening. The heavy thuds came again, uneven and erratic, as if the creature were dragging itself along the forest floor. Fallen leaves crunched under her own feet, but she did not stop. She had to see it, to know what she was dealing with. Through the mist, she caught the outline of a massive shape, hunched low, struggling against the terrain. It was alive, clearly in pain, and unmistakably aware of her presence. Margaret paused, a mixture of awe, fear, and empathy pressing on her chest. She had stumbled upon something extraordinary, something that would change the quiet rhythm of her life forever. Margaret's eyes widened as she took in the full sight of the creature. It was massive, easily over 8 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with thick brown fur streaked faintly with silver. The fur was matted in places, damp with moisture, and streaked with fresh blood. One arm hung awkwardly at its side, bent at an unnatural angle, and each movement seemed to cost it immense effort. Its amber eyes met hers for a brief, intense moment. There was pain in them, yes, but also something deeper. Intelligence, awareness, and an unmistakable sense of sorrow. Margaret felt a shiver run down her spine. This was no ordinary animal. There was a presence, a quiet dignity, even in its suffering. The creature groaned lowly and attempted to shift its weight, wincing with every movement. Margaret noticed the muscles in its legs trembling, the fingers curling instinctively around a patch of grass for support. Despite its size and strength, it was fragile in this moment, vulnerable in a way that tugged at her heart. She swallowed hard and took a cautious step forward. The forest seemed to hold its breath. A distant bird stopped its song. The wind stilled, and even the rustle of leaves softened as if acknowledging the fragile scene unfolding. Margaret instinctively lowered herself slightly, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, hoping to convey calm rather than threat. The creature shifted its gaze back to the ground, its chest heaving with labored breaths. Blood had streaked the fur along its shoulder and side, leaving dark stains that contrasted sharply with the earthy browns of its coat. Margaret could see the tremor in its massive hands, the silent struggle of each heartbeat against the weight of injury. And yet, amidst the pain and exhaustion, there was something almost human in the way it looked at her. A plea, quiet and wordless, as if it knew she might understand. Margaret's chest tightened with empathy. She had faced hardship in her own life, loss and solitude, and she recognized the same raw vulnerability reflected back at her. For a long moment, they simply regarded one another. Margaret felt a strange certainty settle in her chest. She could not turn away. Whatever this creature was, she knew she had to help. Margaret took a slow, deliberate step forward, keeping her hands visible and her movements gentle. The forest seemed impossibly quiet around her, as if the trees themselves were watching. She spoke softly, almost whispering, more to soothe herself than the creature. "Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you," she said, her voice calm and steady. The words felt strange in the stillness, but necessary. The Bigfoot shifted its weight slightly, tensing as her voice reached it. Margaret paused, giving it space. She crouched a little lower, careful to appear non-threatening. Her eyes met its amber gaze again, searching for any sign of fear, any hint of recognition. Slowly, she set her basket down and pulled a clean cloth from inside. She dipped it into a small stream nearby, then approached the creature at an angle, never directly in front, never making sudden movements. She could feel her heart hammering, but the focus on its pain steadied her nerves. The creature flinched as the cloth came closer, but did not move away. Its eyes followed every motion with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Margaret paused, letting it adjust to her presence. A soft, low hum escaped her lips, an instinctive attempt to comfort. The creature's breathing remained heavy, uneven, but the tension in its body eased slightly. She gently dabbed at the wound on its arm, careful not to touch raw flesh directly. The creature flinched, but then froze, letting her continue. Each motion was slow, deliberate, full of patience and care. Margaret spoke again, softly, sharing trivial words about her day, about the forest, anything to fill the silence without startling it. Minutes passed, then longer stretches of quiet observation. The forest held its breath with them. Slowly, the creature lowered its massive head slightly, almost imperceptibly, signaling the tiniest trust. Margaret felt her chest tighten. This fragile acknowledgement, in the midst of its pain, was proof that she was not alone in this moment. For the first time, she believed the impossible. That this enormous, fearsome being might understand her, might accept her help. And she knew, with quiet certainty, that this was only the beginning. Hours passed as Margaret tended to the creature, moving slowly and carefully, always aware of its reactions. She cleaned its wound with gentle dabs of cloth, whispered soft reassurances, and let the forest's quiet presence lend calm to the moment. The creature shifted less now. Its flinches became smaller, more measured, as if testing whether Margaret could be trusted. Margaret felt her heart soften with every glance from its amber eyes. There was an unmistakable intelligence there, an awareness that seemed to recognize her care. At one point, she spoke of her late husband, of the small joys in her life, of quiet mornings just like this. Her voice was steady, calm, almost like a lullaby. The creature's breathing slowed slightly, the tremor in its fingers easing. She realized, with a strange clarity, that it was listening, not merely observing, but absorbing her presence, her calm, her steady rhythm. Margaret placed her hand near the wound, not touching directly, just letting her palm hover as a gesture of patience. The creature flinched once, then hesitated, and finally relaxed its arm slightly. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Margaret recognized it immediately. It was trust, fragile and tentative, but trust nonetheless. She spoke to it softly, repeating the same gentle words, over and over, her tone even and comforting. She hummed quietly, letting the forest echo her voice. The creature's head lowered a little more, and its large hand twitched toward her, not fully reaching, but a gesture that felt like acknowledgement, an unspoken acceptance. In those long, quiet moments, a connection began to take shape. There was no rush, no expectation, only presence and attention. Margaret understood, deeply, that trust could not be forced, it had to be earned, patiently, with care. By late afternoon, the creature allowed her to approach closer than before. It no longer pulled away from the cloth or her hands hovering near its wound. It even shifted slightly, adjusting its position to make it easier for her. The bond was subtle, quiet, but undeniable. Margaret felt a swell of emotion she could barely name. Awe, compassion, and a deep, comforting certainty that they were not alone together. In that secluded forest clearing, an extraordinary connection had begun, one that neither time nor pain could easily break. As the sun dipped lower, the forest was bathed in soft gold and fading warmth. Shadows lengthened between the trees, and the air grew cooler. Margaret settled near the creature, making a small clearing where it could rest safely. She laid a blanket on the damp earth and kept her basket of supplies within reach, just in case. The creature, now slightly more relaxed, huddled close to the edge of the clearing, its massive frame seeming less tense than before. Its breathing was slower, though still labored, and it occasionally shifted, wincing with residual pain. Margaret kept her distance at first, speaking softly whenever it stirred. The forest at night was alive with subtle sounds, a distant owl calling, leaves rustling in the wind, the occasional snap of a twig under a small animal. Margaret remained alert, but she was no longer fearful. She sensed a fragile peace had settled between them, a quiet understanding. Hours passed. Margaret hummed a soft tune from her youth, barely above a whisper. The creature tilted its head, listening, and she noticed the tension in its shoulders ease. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it moved closer, as if drawn by the steadiness of her presence. Margaret offered small gestures, a gentle touch to the blanket near it, a soft murmur of reassurance, and the creature responded in kind. Its massive hand twitched, brushing against the edge of the blanket. A silent acknowledgement. Margaret felt her chest tighten. There was intelligence in those small movements, an unspoken bond that transcended language. Throughout the night, she watched the creature sleep in fits and starts, muscles twitching, ears attuned to every sound. She stayed alert, yet her heart felt calm. There was a quiet miracle in this shared vigil, an enormous, powerful being, once feared by stories and whispers, trusting her enough to rest in her presence. As dawn approached, Margaret leaned back against a tree and closed her eyes briefly, the soft hum of the forest around them. She knew that whatever came next, this night would remain etched in her memory. A night of trust, of quiet companionship, and of a bond formed in the stillness between human and creature. Morning light filtered softly through the trees, painting the forest floor in muted gold and green. Margaret rose slowly, stretching her stiff joints, then turned her attention to the creature. It had slept through most of the night, its breathing now steadier, though the limp in its massive frame remained. She knew it needed a safer resting place, somewhere away from potential predators and the hazards of the forest floor. Margaret approached cautiously, speaking in her usual calm, soothing voice. The creature's amber eyes met hers, and she sensed a silent agreement it would allow her help. Margaret gently encouraged it to rise, speaking softly with each movement. She guided it toward a flatter, more open clearing where the ground was softer and free of debris. Every step was careful, deliberate. The creature hesitated at first, testing her intent, but then shifted its weight, leaning slightly into her guidance. Using a fallen branch as support, Margaret helped the creature stabilize its massive frame. She pressed a hand lightly against its shoulder, letting it know she was there. The creature flinched at first, then relaxed just enough to allow her continued assistance. She adjusted her pace to match its limping rhythm, never rushing, never forcing. At one point, the creature stumbled slightly over a root, and Margaret was ready, steadying it with a soft word and a gentle touch. Its large hand hovered near hers, almost brushing against her arm, a small sign of trust. Margaret's heart tightened. The bond they had formed through patience and care was tangible in that moment. Step by step, they moved toward the safer clearing. Margaret offered water from a small flask, and the creature drank carefully, pausing to meet her gaze each time. There was intelligence in those eyes, a recognition that her actions were meant to help, not to harm. By the time they reached the clearing, the creature had grown more confident in its movements. It lowered itself to rest, settling into a position that seemed comfortable despite its injury. Margaret knelt nearby, watching carefully, her chest full of quiet awe. In that simple act of guiding and supporting, a profound understanding had formed. Margaret realized that trust, once earned, could carry the weight of even the largest, most intimidating presence. And in the stillness of that forest, a fragile partnership of care and respect had begun to flourish. Margaret sat quietly, a few steps away from the creature, watching its chest rise and fall in steady breaths. The forest around them seemed to hold its own breath, the soft rustle of leaves and distant bird calls fading into background silence. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, the creature lifted its massive head and fixed its amber eyes on her. Margaret felt a shiver run through her. There was a depth in that gaze, something more than curiosity or caution. It was awareness, gratitude, and a recognition she could feel in her bones. The creature shifted slightly, lowering itself closer to the ground, and for the first time, Margaret saw a subtle softness in its posture. It was as if the tension of pain and fear was melting, replaced by a fragile trust. Then, in a motion both tentative and deliberate, the creature extended one massive hand toward her. Margaret froze for a heartbeat, unsure if she should move. The hand hovered, fingers slightly curled, brushing the edge of her sleeve without gripping. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a silent thank you that required no words. Margaret's chest tightened. She whispered softly, "It's all right. I'm here." The creature responded with a low, almost human-like hum, a sound that vibrated with emotion more than instinct. Its eyes never left hers. It tilted its head slightly, testing her presence, and when she remained still, it allowed a closer touch. Gingerly, Margaret reached out and placed a hand near its massive fingers. The creature did not pull away. Instead, it rested its enormous hand lightly against hers, the weight heavy but gentle. In that quiet connection, an unspoken bond formed: trust, respect, and something deeper that felt like understanding. Margaret realized then how extraordinary this moment was. The creature, once feared and misunderstood, was capable of emotion, of gratitude, and of subtle gestures of acknowledgement. She felt a profound awe, mingled with tenderness. For several long minutes, they simply remained like that. Two beings, worlds apart in appearance and life, connected by trust and empathy. Margaret's heart swelled with quiet gratitude, knowing this encounter would leave an indelible mark on her life. The Bigfoot's eyes softened further, and with a slow, deliberate nod, it seemed to communicate a wordless promise. It would not forget this care, this presence. In the hush of the forest, Margaret understood fully this was not a creature to fear. This was a life capable of love, capable of recognizing kindness, and capable of responding in the present, most human way possible. The morning sun filtered gently through the forest canopy, casting dappled light across the clearing. Margaret sat quietly, watching the creature stretch slowly, testing its legs. Its movements were more confident now, the limp less pronounced, though the memory of injury lingered in its posture. She knew the time had come for them to part ways. The forest, vast and wild, was its home, not hers. Margaret approached carefully, speaking in the same soft, soothing voice she had used since their first encounter. "It's all right," she whispered. "You're strong now. You can go." The creature regarded her for a long moment, its amber eyes meeting hers. Then, in a gesture of extraordinary gentleness, it lowered itself slightly, resting its massive hand near hers. Margaret reached out and placed her fingers lightly against its fur, careful not to startle it. The warmth of the creature's presence pressed softly against her palm. A silent acknowledgement of their shared time, their bond. Slowly, it rose to its full height, towering yet calm. Margaret stepped back, giving it space, and watched as it tested its legs again, moving with increasing assurance. The creature paused, then lowered its head, almost as if bowing, before taking its first careful steps toward the denser trees at the forest's edge. Margaret followed at a distance, her eyes never leaving it. The creature glanced back once, a long, steady look that held more emotion than words could convey. In that glance, Margaret felt gratitude, understanding, and a quiet promise, a recognition of the trust they had built together. Then it turned fully toward the forest, moving with a surprising grace for its size. Each step carried confidence, each movement a reminder of its regained strength. Margaret remained where she was, her chest tight with a mixture of awe and tenderness. When the last hint of the creature disappeared among the trees, Margaret knelt, briefly, touching the ground where it had rested. She left a small bundle of herbs and a smooth stone, simple tokens of respect and care. Though it had gone, its presence lingered, a quiet reminder of a connection that transcended words and species. Margaret stood slowly, inhaling the fresh forest air. She knew this encounter would stay with her forever. The trust, the shared moments, and the extraordinary proof that even in the wild, compassion could bridge worlds. Margaret returned to her small cabin that evening, the forest quiet behind her. She sat in her favorite chair by the window, the fading sunlight painting soft patterns across the walls. Her hands, still carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, rested on her lap. She took a deep breath, letting the memory of the day wash over her. The encounter with the creature was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Its eyes, so intelligent and aware, haunted her in the gentlest way. The bond they had shared, fragile, quiet, yet profoundly real, was something she could not forget. She realized that kindness, even in the most unexpected places, could create connections that transcended fear, size, and species. Margaret thought of the subtle gestures that had meant so much. The way the creature had allowed her near its wound, the tentative touch of its hand, the slow nod of acknowledgement before it disappeared into the forest. Each memory felt vivid, almost tangible, like a thread connecting her to something extraordinary. She picked up a small notebook and began to write, not for anyone else, but for herself. The words flowed simply and calmly, a record of trust, courage, and care. In her writing, she captured the quiet awe of watching a powerful being learn to trust, the gentle moments that defined their bond, and the sense of wonder that had settled deep in her chest. As night fell and stars began to appear, Margaret felt a profound peace. The forest outside was unchanged, yet she knew that something extraordinary had happened within it and within her. The creature would continue its life, moving through the trees, carrying its own memories of trust and care, just as she would carry hers. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, imagining the forest alive with gentle movement, the soft sound of the creature's presence lingering among the trees. And in that quiet reflection, she understood something timeless. That compassion, patience, and quiet courage could create bonds that never truly fade. Even after it was gone, the memory stayed a gentle, enduring proof that love, empathy, and understanding could exist in the most unlikely of places, touching hearts across the boundary between human and wild.